A man's silence can be deeply confusing, especially when everything in your heart tells you that he still craves you. The mixed signals, the sudden distance, and the unanswered questions create a storm of emotions that can make you feel powerless. But here's what you need to understand. His silence is not about you. It's about him. And more importantly, it's about what's going on inside his mind, not yours. There are countless reasons why a man who desires you might suddenly pull back into silence. It could be fear, uncertainty, emotional immaturity, or even a deep-seated habit of withdrawing rather than confronting his emotions. Some men crave connection, but when faced with the intensity of their feelings, they retreat instead of advancing. It's not because they don't care, it's because they don't know how to handle the weight of what they feel. Silence, for many men, is a defense mechanism. It's their way of creating space, of regaining a sense of control, especially when emotions start to feel overwhelming. Think about it. Men are often taught from an early age to suppress their emotions, to appear strong, to avoid vulnerability. So when they start craving someone deeply, it triggers something within them. That craving isn't just physical. It's emotional, mental, and even spiritual. And for some men, facing those emotions head on is terrifying. Instead of expressing what they feel, they retreat into silence, hoping that the distance will help them regain a sense of power over their own emotions. Now, here's where it gets even more complex. A man can be silent not because he doesn't want you, but because he's unsure of his next move. He might be battling internal doubts, questioning whether he's ready for something real, whether he can handle the depth of what he's feeling. He might fear rejection. He might worry that if he fully opens up, he'll lose himself in the process, or he might be stuck in a pattern where he assumes that by pulling away, he can gauge just how much you truly want him. This is why silence is often misunderstood. Many people take it as rejection, when in reality it's often a reflection of the silent war happening inside his mind. He might be standing at the edge of a decision, caught between his craving for you and his fear of what it means to fully step into that desire. His silence isn't necessarily a sign of indifference. Sometimes it's a sign of internal conflict, of wanting something so badly but being too afraid to admit it, even to himself. But here's something you must realize. His silence is his battle, not yours. Too often people internalize someone else's silence, believing that it means they've done something wrong or that they're not enough. But you must separate his actions from your worth. His inability to express himself is not a reflection of your value. His withdrawal is not an indication of your desirability. A man's silence says far more about him than it does about you. Some men remain silent because they believe that distance makes the heart grow fonder. They think that by stepping back, they will make you miss them more, make you wonder about them, make you feel their absence in a way that draws you closer. This is a form of silent strategy, one that plays on human psychology. When something suddenly becomes scarce, people tend to value it more. And some men knowingly or unknowingly use this principle to create a sense of longing. But then there are those who don't use silence as a strategy, but as a shield. They hide behind their silence because expressing emotions feels too risky. They crave you, but the idea of being vulnerable is terrifying. So they remain in their comfort zone, thinking that if they avoid deep conversations, avoid confrontation, and avoid addressing their feelings, they can somehow maintain control over the situation. Now, you might be wondering, if a man craves you, why wouldn't he simply act on it? Why wouldn't he just communicate instead of pulling away? The answer lies in the way different people process emotions. Some people process emotions outwardly, needing to talk things through, needing reassurance, needing connection to make sense of their feelings. Others process emotions inwardly, needing space, needing time, needing silence to sort through their thoughts. If he belongs to the latter group, his silence isn't about rejecting you, it's about trying to understand himself. At the same time, you must remember that silence can also be a sign of emotional unavailability. Some men crave a connection, but they lack the capacity to nurture one. They want you, but they don't know how to step up. They desire you, but they lack the emotional intelligence to turn that desire into something meaningful. And in these cases, silence is not just a temporary phase, it's a pattern. One that repeats over and over because the man in question has never done the inner work required to truly show up for someone else. Understanding this is key because it stops you from making excuses for someone who repeatedly goes silent without reason. There's a difference between a man who is temporarily silent due to deep introspection and a man who is silent because he lacks the maturity to communicate. If someone's silence becomes a pattern, it's not a moment of reflection, it's a sign of emotional avoidance. And no amount of waiting, overanalyzing, or trying to fix the situation will change that. So when a man craves you yet remains silent, you must resist the urge to personalize his actions. His silence is his burden to carry, not yours. His inner conflicts are not for you to solve. Because at the end of the day, a man who truly values you will not leave you questioning where you stand. He will not hide behind silence. He will not make you chase after clarity. And that distinction is what separates those who are emotionally ready from those who are simply caught in their own indecision. Emotional control is one of the most powerful forces in life. And it plays a critical role when dealing with relationships, particularly when someone you desire goes silent. In the face of silence, many people tend to react impulsively, jumping to conclusions, seeking immediate answers, or allowing their emotions to dictate their behavior. This is where emotional control becomes essential. The strongest individuals are not those who immediately react to every situation. They are the ones who can maintain a calm, measured approach, even when things are unclear or uncomfortable. When someone goes silent, especially someone you care about, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. It can trigger feelings of insecurity, anxiety, or confusion. These emotions often lead to actions that do not serve you well. You might find yourself obsessing over what went wrong, over analyzing every word and action in an attempt to decipher his silence. You may start questioning your own worth, wondering if he's lost interest or if you've done something to push him away. In this vulnerable state, it's tempting to react with urgency, trying to fill the void left by his silence. But emotional control allows you to pause, reflect, and decide how to respond without giving away your power. The act of controlling your emotions doesn't mean suppressing them or pretending you don't care. It's about being in charge of your emotional responses. Emotions are natural. They arise from within and reflect our thoughts and beliefs about a situation. However, it's crucial to recognize that emotions are not facts. Just because you feel insecure, anxious, or hurt doesn't mean those feelings are based on reality. Emotional control comes from the awareness that your emotions do not dictate your actions. Instead, you can choose to respond to your feelings in a way that aligns with your values, rather than reacting based on momentary impulses. In relationships, emotional control becomes a tool of self-respect and self-preservation. When someone you care about is silent, it's easy to fall into a pattern of emotional neediness. But this is where maintaining emotional control is paramount. Emotional neediness often stems from a belief that your happiness and well-being are dependent on another person's actions or attention. It creates an unhealthy dynamic where you start seeking validation from the other person to feel secure. This is a trap. Relying on someone else to determine your emotional state is a surefire way to lose yourself in the relationship and ultimately lose respect for yourself. Instead, emotional control empowers you to keep your sense of worth independent of someone else's behavior. You can choose to remain calm and composed even when faced with uncertainty. When you don't react impulsively to someone's silence, you are not allowing that silence to dictate your emotional state. Instead, you are taking control of your own emotions and refusing to let them lead you down a path of anxiety, self-doubt, or desperation. The ability to maintain emotional control gives you the space to evaluate the situation more clearly and make decisions from a place of strength rather than emotional turmoil. In moments of silence, it's essential to pause and breathe. When someone goes silent, there is often a rush to fill the void, whether it's by texting constantly, reaching out too soon, or even overthinking every interaction. Emotional control is the act of stepping back and choosing not to engage in those automatic behaviors. Instead of scrambling for answers or trying to force a conversation, you choose to take a step back and reflect. You ask yourself why you're feeling the way you are, what assumptions you may be making, and whether your actions are coming from a place of inner strength or emotional need. Maintaining emotional control also means being able to sit with discomfort. Silence can stir up a lot of uncomfortable feelings, especially when there's no immediate resolution. However, emotional control allows you to sit in that discomfort without being consumed by it. You don't have to act on every feeling that arises. Instead, you can observe your emotions, acknowledge them, and decide how to move forward with clarity. In doing so, you preserve your peace of mind and give yourself the chance to think clearly and act from a position of confidence. One of the most important aspects of emotional control is the ability to recognize when your emotions are running high and when you need to give yourself space to process them. When faced with silence or withdrawal from someone you care about, it's natural for emotions to surface. But it's crucial not to let them dictate your actions in the heat of the moment. Emotional control allows you to make decisions that align with your long-term goals, values, and emotional well-being, rather than reacting in ways that could compromise those things. In relationships, emotional control is often what separates those who can navigate challenges with grace and those who become consumed by their emotions. When you react impulsively, you often end up regretting your actions later. Emotional control prevents this by allowing you to pause before you speak, act, or even think. You take time to process what's happening, to understand your feelings, and to decide on the most productive way to move forward. This not only protects your own emotional health, but also strengthens the respect others have for you. People are naturally drawn to those who are calm, composed, and in control of their emotions, even in the face of uncertainty. This process of emotional control is not easy, especially when you're emotionally invested in someone's presence and attention. But it's important to remember that emotional control is not about being perfect or suppressing your emotions. It's about recognizing that you are in charge of your emotional responses, and that your emotional well-being doesn't have to depend on someone else's actions. It's about realizing that your peace of mind is within your own control, and no one, not even the silence of someone you care about, can take that away unless you let them. It's important to recognize that silence, while it may initially feel like rejection or a sign of disinterest, is often an internal process for someone trying to navigate their own thoughts and emotions. When someone is silent, especially a person who craves you, it is rarely a reflection of how they feel about you directly. Instead, it reflects their struggle with something within themselves, whether it's fear of vulnerability, uncertainty about what they want, or an inability to express their emotions properly. Understanding that someone's silence is rooted in their own inner conflict can help you detach your own emotions from their actions. Sometimes when someone is craving a deeper connection but remains silent, it's because they are struggling with the intensity of their own feelings. In relationships, emotions can be overwhelming. They can cause people to question themselves, their worth, and their readiness for commitment. When a man craves you but stays silent, it could be that he is trying to process his emotions in isolation because he feels unprepared or unsure about how to communicate his feelings effectively. This silence is not a signal that you are not desirable. It's an indication that he is trying to reconcile what he feels with his ability to express it. Many people, particularly men, have been conditioned to hide their emotions rather than express them openly. From a young age, society often teaches men to suppress their vulnerability and display strength instead. As a result, when they crave someone emotionally, they don't always know how to communicate that in healthy ways. Instead of reaching out, they retreat into silence because it feels safer. Or they may not even realize the impact of their withdrawal on others. The silence, then, is not necessarily a deliberate form of punishment. It's a form of emotional self-protection. They may not want to appear weak or be perceived as emotionally needy, so they retreat into a space where they can think through their feelings without feeling exposed or vulnerable. This internal battle of wanting something deeply yet being afraid to act on it can create a confusing dynamic. It might feel as though the person is pushing you away or that they don't want you, but in reality, they are battling their own fears and insecurities. The silence becomes their defense mechanism to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. In these situations, it's not that they don't care about you. It's that they care so much that they don't know how to navigate the overwhelming emotions that arise. They crave connection, but at the same time, they fear the vulnerability that comes with it. At the core of this behavior is often a fear of rejection or the fear of getting hurt. If someone has been hurt in the past, whether in a previous relationship or in other areas of their life, they may unconsciously distance themselves to avoid being vulnerable again. The silence is not an indication of a lack of interest. Rather, it's a manifestation of the fear that comes with opening oneself up to someone else. If a person craves you but doesn't act on it, it may be because they are afraid that if they fully engage emotionally, they could face heartbreak or disappointment. To protect themselves from potential pain, they choose silence as a way to maintain some emotional distance, even though their desire for closeness remains. For some, the silence is a reflection of uncertainty about the future. People crave connection, but they also fear the long-term implications of a relationship. There is a natural fear of commitment and a fear of what it means to fully give yourself to another person. This uncertainty can create inner tension, and instead of communicating this fear openly, some individuals retreat into silence, hoping to figure it out on their own. The silence is their way of giving themselves space to think about what they want from the relationship, how they see the future, and whether they're ready to take the next step. Their internal dialogue may be filled with doubt, and the silence becomes a form of self-preservation as they try to come to terms with their emotions and desires. Moreover, silence in these situations is often tied to a lack of emotional literacy. Not everyone is equipped with the skills to understand and articulate their feelings. People who haven't learned how to express their emotions effectively may struggle to convey what they're going through, even if they desperately want to be open. This lack of communication skills can create a barrier between two people, especially when one is craving emotional intimacy. The person may not know how to express what they feel without it coming across as too overwhelming or too intense. Instead of risking vulnerability, they choose silence, hoping that the other person will understand that it's not about them. It's about the individual's own limitations in processing and expressing their feelings. Additionally, the silence can also be a sign of emotional immaturity. Not everyone has the emotional maturity to communicate their needs or to navigate the complexities of a relationship with grace. Emotional maturity involves being able to recognize and express your feelings in a healthy, constructive way while also being able to understand and empathize with others. When someone craves you but remains silent, it may indicate that they have not developed the emotional tools to navigate their feelings properly. Instead of addressing the situation directly, they might withdraw into themselves, making it more difficult to bridge the gap and create the connection they truly desire. The silence is also a way for some people to test the waters, albeit unconsciously. By pulling back and observing how you respond, they may be seeking reassurance about your feelings. They want to see if you will chase them, if you will reach out, or if you will pull away in return. It's an unconscious way of gauging your level of interest and commitment without fully exposing themselves. The silence becomes a tool for creating uncertainty, which can make them feel more secure in knowing whether you genuinely care. However, this approach is often unhealthy and counterproductive as it creates confusion and emotional strain rather than fostering open, honest communication. In essence, when someone craves you yet remains silent, it reflects a complex mix of emotional struggles, fear, uncertainty, and sometimes a lack of emotional intelligence. The silence doesn't mean they don't care. It simply means that they are facing their own internal battles and are unsure of how to move forward. The key is to understand that their silence is not a direct reflection of your worth or desirability. Instead, it's a reflection of their own journey through their emotions. While it can be painful to experience, it's crucial to remember that their struggle is separate from your value. When someone is silent, it's easy to assume that they've lost interest or that their feelings have changed. But in many cases, silence is a defense mechanism, a shield to protect themselves from vulnerability. Vulnerability is a powerful force in relationships, and while it can create deep connections, it can also expose a person to potential hurt and rejection. When someone craves you but remains silent, it may be that they are afraid of what will happen if they let themselves be open. Vulnerability requires a level of emotional courage that not everyone is ready to face. And for some, the fear of being vulnerable can cause them to retreat into silence as a means of self-protection. In a relationship, vulnerability means allowing yourself to be truly seen, to share your fears, desires, and weaknesses without the guarantee that the other person will respond with acceptance or care. This is a scary thing for many people, especially if they've experienced rejection or emotional trauma in the past. When someone craves you but stays silent, it could be that they are grappling with the fear of being vulnerable and the potential pain that might come with it. They may want to open up, but they are unsure of how to navigate the delicate balance between expressing their true emotions and protecting themselves from hurt. Vulnerability also requires trust. It involves letting down your guard and giving someone the power to hurt you emotionally. Trust is not something that can be easily given, and it takes time to build. For someone who has been hurt before, the instinct to protect themselves can become so strong that it overshadows their desire to connect. In this sense, silence becomes a form of emotional armor, a way of keeping the other person at arm's length while still craving the connection. The person may want to be close to you, but finds themselves unwilling or unable to take the emotional risk of being vulnerable because they fear that trust may be broken or that they may not be able to handle the emotional fallout. For some, vulnerability can feel like a loss of control. When you allow someone to see you fully, you expose your emotions, and that means you open yourself up to the possibility that things may not go as you expect. This can feel threatening, especially for individuals who have a strong need to maintain control over their environment and their emotional state. If someone craves you but stays silent, it could be that they are unwilling to give up that control preferring to hide their true feelings behind silence rather than risking the vulnerability that would come with expressing them. It's easier for them to remain distant, emotionally closed off, than to expose themselves and risk being hurt or rejected. Moreover, vulnerability in relationships often requires both people to be emotionally available. And if one person is not ready to meet that level of openness, they may withdraw to avoid facing their own emotional limitations. When one person craves a deeper connection but stays silent, it can indicate that they feel emotionally overwhelmed or unable to cope with the intimacy that comes with sharing their true self. They may recognize that they need to be open in order to build a meaningful connection, but they may not have the emotional tools or readiness to do so. As a result, their silence becomes a barrier that keeps them from fully engaging, even though they crave the connection that vulnerability can bring. Silence can also be a way of dealing with emotional conflict. When someone is silent, it might be because they are struggling with conflicting emotions. They may desire a deeper connection with you, but also feel uncertain or conflicted about what that connection means for their life. Sometimes silence is the result of internal chaos, where the person is trying to figure out how they truly feel, what they want, or what the next step should be. The inability to articulate those conflicting emotions can lead to withdrawal, as they fear that speaking too soon might cause further confusion or emotional harm. In relationships, vulnerability often involves facing one's own fears and insecurities. When someone craves you but remains silent, it could be that they are confronting deep-rooted fears about their worthiness of love and affection. They may fear that they are not enough, or that they will be judged, rejected, or abandoned once they reveal their true self. This fear of rejection can be paralyzing, and instead of opening up, they choose silence as a way to protect themselves from the pain of potential rejection. The silence is a defense mechanism to prevent emotional exposure, even though they may yearn for the intimacy that comes from being vulnerable. Additionally, silence in the face of desire can be a manifestation of shame. Shame often comes from the belief that you are inherently flawed or undeserving of love and affection. If someone craves you but remains silent, it could be that they are battling feelings of shame that prevent them from expressing their true emotions. They may feel unworthy of the connection they desire, or fear that their vulnerability will expose them as weak or inadequate. In these cases, silence becomes a way of hiding their true feelings, as they try to avoid the emotional discomfort that comes from acknowledging their desires and vulnerabilities. Furthermore, vulnerability can be intimidating because it exposes the potential for emotional dependency. Some people fear becoming emotionally reliant on others, as it can feel like an erosion of independence and self-sufficiency. In relationships, this fear of dependency can manifest as emotional avoidance, where a person may crave connection but resist vulnerability in an attempt to maintain emotional independence. This is particularly common in individuals who have been taught to value independence above all else, leading them to suppress their emotional needs and avoid being vulnerable to maintain a sense of control. In all of these cases, silence is not a reflection of a lack of desire or interest. Instead, it is a coping mechanism that helps protect the individual from the discomfort and fear associated with vulnerability. They crave connection and intimacy, but they are not yet ready to open themselves up to the possibility of emotional pain, rejection, or hurt. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it helps separate the silence from any personal rejection. It allows you to see that their silence is more about their internal emotional struggles than it is about how they feel about you. While their silence can feel painful and frustrating, it's important to remember that it is often a reflection of their own fear and vulnerability, not a reflection of your worth. One of the key reasons behind someone's silence, despite craving a deeper connection, is the internal battle between their desire for closeness and the fear of emotional exposure. This fear often stems from past experiences that have left emotional scars. A person who has been hurt in past relationships, whether through betrayal, heartbreak, or emotional neglect, often carries that emotional baggage into new interactions. They may crave intimacy and closeness, but the pain from their past makes them hesitant to open up. This creates a paradox in which they long for connection, but simultaneously retreat into silence to protect themselves from potential emotional harm. When someone has been wounded in the past, it can be difficult for them to trust again. Trust is a fragile thing that takes time to build. And for those who have been hurt before, it is something they are often afraid to offer. Their silence may reflect their inability to fully trust the other person with their heart. The fear of vulnerability becomes overwhelming because deep down, they may feel that allowing themselves to be open again is like opening themselves up to being hurt once more. Even though they may want to share their thoughts and feelings, the anxiety surrounding trust keeps them silent. The fear of vulnerability is often compounded by a fear of rejection. If someone has experienced rejection in past relationships, whether from a partner, a family member, or a friend, they may be overly cautious about putting themselves in a position where they could face the same rejection again. Rejection can feel like a blow to a person's self-worth, and the pain that comes from being rejected can be difficult to recover from. As a result, someone who craves connection but stays silent may be terrified that if they allow themselves to be emotionally open, they will be rejected or dismissed. Their silence is a shield against the possibility of that rejection, even though it may be preventing them from experiencing the very closeness they desire. In addition to past wounds, emotional dependency is another factor that can lead someone to remain silent despite their craving for connection. Some people fear becoming too emotionally dependent on another person. Emotional dependency can feel like a loss of control or a threat to one's independence. And for those who have a strong need for autonomy, this fear can be paralyzing. If a person craves you but is afraid of becoming too reliant on you emotionally, they may retreat into silence to protect their sense of self-sufficiency. This fear of emotional dependency can cause them to distance themselves, even though they desire intimacy, because they are subconsciously afraid of losing themselves in the process of forming a deep emotional connection. Another layer to this dynamic is the concept of self-worth. Individuals with low self-esteem or a poor self-image may crave affection and emotional closeness, but they simultaneously feel unworthy of it. They may be afraid that once they open up, they will reveal their perceived flaws, which will cause the other person to see them as inadequate or unlovable. This fear of being judged or rejected for their perceived imperfections can keep them silent, even when their desire for connection is strong. The silence, in this case, is a form of self-protection. They may fear that if they share too much, they will be exposed as not enough. This fear of inadequacy can be paralyzing, making it difficult for them to express themselves authentically. Additionally, a person's inability to communicate effectively can contribute to their silence. Communication is a vital component of any relationship, yet many people struggle to articulate their feelings, especially when those feelings are complex or difficult to express. Someone who craves a deeper connection but is silent may simply not know how to communicate their emotions in a way that feels comfortable or safe to them. They may feel overwhelmed by the intensity of their feelings and unsure of how to verbalize what they are experiencing. For some, it may feel like an insurmountable challenge to find the right words to express their needs. And as a result, they choose silence rather than risk saying something that could be misinterpreted or misunderstood. In this case, their silence is not an indication of a lack of desire or interest. It is a result of their internal struggle to find the right words to express what they are feeling. The fear of making the wrong move can also play a significant role in why someone craves you but remains silent. In relationships, there's often pressure to get it right, to say the right thing, do the right thing, and make the right impression. This pressure can be especially intense for people who have experienced rejection or emotional pain in the past. The fear of making a mistake or saying something that could push the other person away can cause them to freeze up and stay silent. They may crave your attention and affection, but the fear of jeopardizing the connection by saying or doing the wrong thing prevents them from taking action. In their mind, silence is safer than taking the risk, saying something that might cause harm or miscommunication. Silence can also be an unconscious coping mechanism for dealing with anxiety. Some people have a natural tendency to withdraw when they are feeling anxious or overwhelmed. If someone is craving connection but is feeling anxious about the potential emotional consequences, they may retreat into silence as a way to manage their anxiety. They may not even be fully aware that they are doing this. It is simply a learned response to emotional overwhelm. The silence allows them to regain a sense of control over their emotions and gives them time to process their feelings without the added pressure of interaction. While this can provide temporary relief, it ultimately prevents them from engaging fully in the connection they desire. In relationships, the fear of being misunderstood can also keep people silent. When emotions run high, it can be easy to misinterpret someone's intentions or feelings. A person who craves connection but remains silent may be worried that their emotions will be misread or that they will not be understood by the other person. This fear of miscommunication can be especially strong in situations where there is emotional vulnerability. The silence becomes a way to avoid the potential discomfort that might come from being misunderstood or misjudged. In summary, the silence that arises when someone craves connection is often a result of a deep internal struggle. Whether it stems from past emotional trauma, fear of rejection, self-worth issues, a lack of communication skills, or anxiety, the silence is a protective measure that helps shield the individual from emotional pain and vulnerability. Although it can be difficult to understand and navigate, it's essential to recognize that the silence is not a reflection of a lack of desire. Rather, it is a manifestation of their internal fears and uncertainties. Understanding this can help you approach the situation with patience, empathy, and a deeper awareness of what the other person is going through. When we examine the reasons behind why someone may crave your presence but remain silent, it's essential to consider the dynamic between power and control. Many people, especially those who have experienced hardship or have a history of emotional instability, feel a need to maintain control over their lives, including their emotional state. The act of silence can often serve as a defense mechanism against losing that control. This desire to hold onto power is rooted in the belief that if they can control their emotions and actions, they are less vulnerable to external influences, including potential hurt. For them, silence becomes a tool to maintain emotional self-sufficiency. They may crave connection, but at the same time, fear losing their sense of independence and autonomy. In many ways, their silence is a way to keep the balance of power in their favor. People who have been in toxic or controlling relationships in the past may develop this tendency to hold back their emotions as a result of their experiences. In relationships where they were manipulated or emotionally invalidated, silence becomes a way of ensuring that they are not subject to further manipulation or control. They may crave a genuine connection but are so wary of being taken advantage of or losing their independence that they withdraw into silence. They see being emotionally open as a risk to their power and security. When this happens, they often find it difficult to let down their guard and express their true feelings for fear of being manipulated or controlled again. This internal struggle can also be influenced by the fear of being too emotionally dependent on another person. Dependency, particularly emotional dependency, is something many people find uncomfortable as it signifies vulnerability and reliance on someone else for their happiness or well-being. The more someone craves emotional connection, the more they may fear becoming dependent on the other person. They fear that if they open up and express their feelings too freely, they may become emotionally attached in a way that feels too risky. The silence is, in this case, a coping mechanism to keep their emotions at arm's length and prevent themselves from feeling emotionally trapped. The longer they stay silent, the more they feel in control of their own emotional state and avoid what they perceive as the potential danger of dependency. In many cases, someone who craves you but remains silent is also grappling with the fear of emotional exposure. Emotional exposure can feel like a form of nakedness, showing the world who you truly are, flaws and all. This kind of vulnerability can be incredibly daunting, particularly for individuals who have a fear of rejection or judgment. The silence in this instance is a defense against being seen as weak, imperfect, or emotionally needy. This fear is often exacerbated by a history of judgment from others. If someone has been ridiculed, criticized, or dismissed in the past for showing vulnerability, they may adopt silence as a shield to protect themselves from experiencing the same hurt again. They may crave closeness, but feel that expressing their emotions is too risky. They're afraid that doing so would expose them to criticism or rejection. Therefore, silence becomes their default mode of operation because it allows them to hide behind a facade of emotional stability, even if internally they long for connection. Some individuals may also struggle with the idea of being too much for others. If they've experienced situations where their emotional expression was met with annoyance or dismissal, they may begin to believe that their feelings are a burden. This belief can drive them to remain silent about their desires and emotions, even when they are craving connection. They fear that opening up will overwhelm the other person, creating an imbalance in the relationship where they feel like a burden or an emotional drain. In their silence, they may hope to avoid creating discomfort or tension, opting instead for a self-imposed isolation. Their craving for connection exists alongside a deep-seated belief that expressing it will result in rejection or being seen as emotionally excessive. This internal conflict can cause them to retreat into silence, unwilling to risk being perceived as too much. Another layer to this silence is the concept of timing. Some people crave connection but feel that it's not the right moment to express themselves. They may be waiting for the perfect time when they feel they can articulate their emotions more clearly, or when they believe the other person will be more receptive. This can stem from a deep desire to make sure their feelings are received in the best way possible. They want to avoid saying the wrong thing or creating unnecessary pressure, so they hold back, even though their craving for connection grows stronger. In their minds, they're just waiting for the right moment to share what's on their hearts. But this silence only prolongs the distance between them and the person they desire to connect with. In the meantime, they suffer in silence, waiting for the perfect opportunity to open up and express their emotions in a way that feels safe and comfortable. There is also a strong correlation between personal identity and silence in relationships. Some individuals struggle with a fear of losing their sense of self when they become emotionally involved with someone. Their silence is a means of self-preservation, ensuring that they don't become enmeshed in another person's life to the point of losing their individuality. They may crave the closeness and connection that comes with a deep relationship, but fear that they will lose themselves in the process. This fear can lead to a reluctance to share their feelings or desires openly because they don't want to risk becoming emotionally consumed by the relationship. For them, silence represents the maintenance of their own identity and boundaries. It's a way of ensuring that they can remain true to themselves while still craving the emotional connection that they deeply desire. This struggle with maintaining personal identity can be particularly strong in relationships where one person has a tendency to dominate or control. If someone has been in a relationship where their partner dictated their thoughts, feelings, or actions, they may develop a fear of being absorbed into the other person's emotional world. This fear drives them to remain silent, hoping to protect their sense of autonomy. They crave connection but remain quiet because they believe that speaking up or expressing their emotions could lead to a loss of control over their own identity. This desire for independence, combined with a fear of emotional over-involvement, makes silence their natural choice. Lastly, silence in the face of craving emotional connection can often be attributed to a person's deep-seated internal conflict. They may genuinely want to share their feelings, but are simultaneously afraid of the consequences. This internal tug-of-war can be exhausting and confusing as they struggle between the desire for connection and the fear of the emotional fallout that may come with it. The longer they remain silent, the more they feel like they are caught in a never-ending cycle of emotional suppression. This conflict can be emotionally draining, leaving them feeling isolated and disconnected, even when they long for closeness